Many parents out there, you still have your children. You still can hug them. You still can call them. You still can celebrate their life with them. And we do not have that anymore.
And today, loved ones of Nolan Wells are uniting with faith leaders and supporters on what would have been his 19th birthday. Instead of a celebration, a national prayer rally is happening just outside of Biloxi, Mississippi tonight. DeKalb County's New Birth Missionary Baptist Church pastor, Dr. Jamal Bryan, is set to deliver a keynote address. Tonight's rally is going to serve as a moment of prayer and as a national call to action in the death of Nolan Wells, who vanished on Horn Island while enjoying the July 4th holiday with friends. His body was found 2 days later, and just last week at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference, Wells's family renewed their call for justice.
August 19 is only a date on a calendar for most people, but for Nolan Wells' family, this year, that date carries a weight that is almost impossible to separate from everything that has happened since the 4th of July. Nolan should have been getting ready to turn 19. His family should have been thinking about the ordinary things families think about when a teenager reaches another birthday. What to eat, who to invite, what gift might make him smile, where everyone would gather, and what the next year of his life might look like. Instead, August 19 arrives, with Nolan gone, an investigation still unfolding, and questions that have not been answered publicly. And that is why this birthday matters to the case right now. Not because August 19 itself produced a new investigative breakthrough. It did not. And not because there is some verified birthday day revelation that suddenly explains what happened to Nolan. There isn't one. The significance is more difficult than that. The closer the date gets, the harder it becomes to ignore the distance between the life Nolan should have been living and the uncertainty that still surrounds the circumstances of his death. For people who have followed this case from the beginning, that uncertainty is already familiar. You know about the July 4th trip to Horn Island. You know Nolan did not return with the friends who had gone there with him. You know his body was found 2 days later. You know his family questioned parts of the early response and the explanations they were given. But what has changed is the stage of the story. Nolan's parents have now spoken publicly at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Atlanta. Civil rights leaders have joined them in calling for a federal review. The Congressional Black Caucus has urged the Justice Department to independently review the disappearance and death. The state autopsy has been completed, but its results remain unavailable to the public. The case is expected to go before a grand jury. And as August 19 approaches, Nolan's family is being forced to confront a date that was supposed to mark the beginning of another year of his life, while they are still trying to understand how his last one ended. There is something especially painful about a birthday in a case like this, because birthdays are built around the future. For Nolan's parents, August 19 represents the future they expected to have. Nolan would have been 19. His parents were supposed to be watching that process. And those are two very different kinds of waiting. The other is the waiting that comes when a family has lost someone under circumstances they believe still require answers. It is also a marker of how much time has passed without a publicly released final explanation. More than a month has passed since his body was found. That does not automatically mean the authorities know nothing. It does not automatically mean the report contains a shocking secret. It means the results have not been made public while the investigation proceeds. What August 19 means to the family. At the NABJ convention, Nolan's parents were not simply repeating an old statement. They were talking about what it feels like to continue living with unanswered questions while the date of their son's birthday approaches. That part of the story is important because the family's position has never been simply that they want attention. Their public argument is that they want a complete understanding of what happened to their son. And now August 19 provides a natural focal point for that pressure. That distinction matters too. A prayer gathering is not evidence, but public attention can influence how long an unresolved case remains visible. Nolan's family does not have the luxury of letting the case become yesterday's news. Every new date becomes a reminder that he is not coming home, while the circumstances of his death remain under investigation. The July 4th trip is still the starting point, but one fact remains central to understanding why the birthday carries so much weight. Nolan left for a 4th of July outing on Horn Island and did not return to the mainland with the friends who had traveled there with him. His body was found in the water just off Horn Island on the morning of July 6, but the investigation did not produce a simple public explanation that resolved every question. That is why the story remains active. What we know about the autopsies. The first is the official state autopsy conducted in Mississippi. Those examinations should not be treated as interchangeable. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Roger Mitchell, also described limitations that affected what could be concluded. The body had undergone decomposition, and portions had already been examined or removed during the state examination. That meant the independent pathologist could not simply recreate every part of the original examination. It cannot be presented as proof of drowning either. The state autopsy is different. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath said the report will be withheld until the case materials are presented to a grand jury. The DA has explained that deaths of this kind are presented to a grand jury in the county, and that the investigation must be completed before the material is presented. The accurate answer is that the report has not been publicly released while the investigation and grand jury process are pending. But frustration is not evidence of what the report says. The grand jury issue is one of the clearest signs that the case has entered a different phase. Now the investigation is moving toward a formal review of the evidence. A grand jury is not the same thing as a trial, and grand jury review does not automatically mean that someone has been identified as responsible for Nolan's death. The grand jury is part of the process of determining whether the evidence supports criminal action. The public also does not know when every piece of evidence will be made available, and that becomes especially significant as August 19 approaches. The call for a federal review. It is the call for federal review. The Congressional Black Caucus has urged the Justice Department to independently review Nolan's disappearance and death. The request for review is not the same as an announcement that the Justice Department has opened a criminal investigation. Still, the request is significant because it shows how far the family's demand for answers has traveled. The case has become a subject of national attention, civil rights advocacy, congressional concern, and public debate. It does tell us something about the current state of the case. That is the larger significance of the federal review request as August 19 approaches. At the center of all of this is a question that has remained remarkably simple. The question sounds almost too broad, but that is exactly why it continues to matter. They have questioned the sequence of events, the response to his disappearance, and the information they received while trying to find him. At the same time, authorities have maintained that they are investigating and have not established foul play. A family can be deeply suspicious of an explanation without having proof of a different explanation, and a case can remain unresolved without every unanswered question being evidence of wrongdoing. The audience already knows the competing narratives. The friend's account adds another layer. According to their account, Nolan chose to remain on the island while they left after their boat developed problems. They also said he had left his phone on their boat, but they are still an account from the people who were there. Nolan's parents have questioned the account, particularly the idea that he would voluntarily remain on the island without his phone and rely on another ride. The right way to present this is to let the audience understand the tension without declaring which side is telling the truth. The family says that explanation does not fit what they knew about Nolan. That is where the suspense actually lives. The phone question has not been resolved. This is another area where it is very easy for online discussion to get ahead of the facts. That means the phone should not be described as having already revealed a hidden clue. The significance of the phone is precisely that a proper forensic examination could potentially help clarify parts of Nolan's final hours, but that examination has not yet produced a public conclusion. Their attorneys have discussed the possibility of a joint forensic examination, potentially involving federal expertise or a digital forensics laboratory. That dispute is a procedural development, but it matters, because digital evidence can be especially valuable in reconstructing a timeline. When did the device last connect to a network? What information is actually recoverable? But until the phone is examined and the findings are independently verified, none of those questions should be presented as answered. There is another reason to be careful with August 19th. But the public record does not support that. There is no verified announcement that the grand jury will meet on August 19th. And there is no verified evidence that Nolan's birthday itself uncovered a hidden piece of evidence. A birthday is supposed to be about what comes next. It forces Nolan's parents to remember the son who should be turning 19, and it puts pressure on everyone involved to confront how much remains unknown. The NABJ convention appearance is important because it brought several strands of the story into one place. Ben Crump was there. Congressional attention was being directed toward the case. That combination makes the appearance more than a routine press event. Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley have had to tell the story of their son's death while living through it. It is their son. Every public update carries two meanings at once. And there is the personal meaning. What would Nolan be doing if he were still alive? the difference between pressure and proof. There has been enormous pressure for answers. There have been public statements from civil rights leaders. There has been an independent autopsy. None of those things, individually or collectively, establishes a particular cause of death. The strongest story is not necessarily the one that makes the most dramatic accusation. In Nolan's case, the unresolved space is large enough to carry the story without inventing anything. The independent autopsy did not determine a cause or manner of death. The phone has not yet been forensically analyzed according to recent reporting, and the family is asking for federal review. What could change the picture? The first is the state autopsy report. The second is the grand jury process. The third is digital evidence. The fourth is witness evidence. The fifth is any federal review, if one is ultimately undertaken. Those potential developments are why the story is still moving. The emotional weight of turning 1919 is not a symbolic age in the way 18 or 21 can be, but for a family, it is still a new year of life. For Nolan's parents, that transition has been taken away. That is the emotional bridge between the birthday and the investigation. It reminds everyone why the case matters. A person can become a headline after death. He had parents. He had plans. And the family is now living with the fact that none of those plans can continue. So as August 19 approaches, what should people who have followed this case actually be watching? The report exists, it has been completed, it has not been publicly released. The case is expected to be presented for review, but the public does not yet know the outcome. The Congressional Black Caucus has asked the Justice Department to review the case. Whether that request produces further federal action remains to be seen. The device has become one of the most discussed pieces of potential digital evidence, but recent reporting says it has not yet undergone the forensic analysis the family wants. His friends have offered their explanation. His parents have questioned it. Investigators must weigh those accounts against the rest of the evidence. Because regardless of what happens legally, August 19 will still be Nolan's birthday. The only question is what the public will know by the time that date arrives. There is a temptation in unresolved cases to fill empty spaces with certainty. When a phone has not been analyzed, people imagine what it must contain. And when officials do not release every piece of evidence, people can assume the missing information must confirm the worst theory. The honest mystery in Nolan's case is already serious enough. He did not return with the group. An independent autopsy could not determine a definitive cause or manner of death. The case is expected to go before a grand jury. The Congressional Black Caucus wants DOJ to review the case. That is the story. August 19 is getting closer. How much longer before the state autopsy becomes public? How much longer before the phone is properly examined? And how much longer will Nolan's parents have to wait before they can look at the circumstances surrounding their son's death and feel that they have finally been given a complete account? And that is exactly why the birthday has become such an important moment in the story. For Nolan's parents, it will be the day their son should have turned 19. And for the investigation, the next meaningful development will not come from the date itself. The story is not over. It began as a missing person emergency. Then came the independent autopsy, which failed to provide a definitive answer. Now there is congressional pressure for a federal review, new public accounts from people who were with Nolan during his final known hours, and a birthday that is about to arrive without him. What happened to Nolan? It cannot be created by social media speculation. It has to come from evidence. That is what the federal review request is about. And that is why the next few developments matter far more than any rumor circulating online. There is still time before August 19th. There is time for officials to provide additional information. There is time for the federal review request to receive a response. But until something changes, the birthday remains what it is, a painful marker of the life Nolan should have been living. Instead, his parents are approaching the date while waiting for information about how their 18-year-old son died. The case is still moving, but the family is also approaching a date that cannot be moved. The next meaningful answers are likely to come from the process already underway, not from speculation. The grand jury remains a significant next step. The federal review request is now part of the story. None of that tells us today exactly what happened to Nolan, and it tells us why August 19 has become more than a date. Nolan was supposed to be 19. Instead, they are remembering him and asking for answers. Because if this case is going to reach a real answer, that answer has to survive scrutiny. And it has to explain the questions that have kept Nolan's family searching for answers. There is a point in every unresolved case where the calendar itself begins to tell the story. It is the date when an 18-year-old, who should still be planning his future, would have turned 19. It is the date supporters are being asked to use for remembrance and prayer. The state autopsy is complete, but not public. The grand jury process is ahead. Friends have offered a new account of Nolan's final interaction, while his parents have questioned that explanation. Those are the developments surrounding Nolan's birthday. Not a claim that the case has been solved. If you have been following Nolan's story, then you already know how much has happened since July 4th, and whether the answers the family has been asking for will finally begin to take shape. The public has seen press conferences, headlines, statements from attorneys, and photographs of Nolan, but much of what his parents have described happened away from cameras, during the hours when they were simply trying to find their son. That part of the story matters because the emotional impact of August 19 cannot be separated from the way the family experienced the search. The difference between those experiences is enormous. That is why the family's recent decision to speak again is important. They are not simply asking people to remember Nolan. They are asking people to remember that the investigation is still unresolved. August 19 puts a specific date on the loss. It is no longer only the anniversary of a disappearance or the date his body was found. It is a date that was supposed to belong to Nolan's future. It gives the audience a way to understand why the family is still publicly engaged, even though more than a month has passed. Investigations do. Audiences move to the next headline, and it is coming without their son. At first, the central public concern was local. What happened on Horn Island, how Nolan disappeared, and why he did not return with the people who had gone there with him. Those conversations can be emotionally charged, but the underlying factual development is straightforward. The Wells family has asked for additional scrutiny, civil rights figures have supported that request, and members of the Congressional Black Caucus have urged the Justice Department to review the case. But it is important not to confuse escalation in public attention with a change in the official finding. There is also no public finding identifying a person responsible for Nolan's death. It has become nationally prominent without becoming legally resolved. Nolan's name is now recognized by people who never knew him personally. His parents have addressed journalists. Civil rights leaders have spoken publicly. Lawmakers have called for federal review. Yet the family still does not have the public resolution they are seeking. The date does not force the evidence to move. And that is a much more defensible source of suspense. The better question is, what if anything will have changed by the time his birthday arrives? In an unresolved death investigation, missing information can become more powerful than confirmed information because people fill the gaps themselves. People have debated what happened on the island. They have debated the accounts given by people who were there. They have debated the medical findings. They have debated the phone. They have debated the response of authorities. Others are conclusions that have moved far beyond what the public evidence supports. A legitimate question can be asked without deciding the answer. That is a factual question. Again, that is a question. Likewise, asking why Nolan stayed behind is reasonable. His friends have offered an explanation, and his parents have questioned it. The same principle applies to the autopsy, but it does not give the public permission to select a cause from the possibilities and call it fact. Viewers who have followed Nolan's story do not need every rumor repeated. They need to know which developments are real and which ones have not crossed the line into evidence. The date gives us a reason to return to the case, but the facts determine where the story goes. One of the most important distinctions in this story is the difference between remembering Nolan and explaining his death. It is about the young man his family says he was, the life he was building, and the birthday that should have been celebrated. It is about evidence, timelines, medical findings, witness accounts, digital records, and legal procedure. A prayer gathering cannot determine a cause of death. A congressional request cannot substitute for an investigative finding. At the same time, the existence of an investigation should not erase the human meaning of the birthday. If the video focuses only on the procedural side, the audience may lose sight of why the case has remained so important to the family. The strongest version holds both at once. His parents are approaching that birthday without him. That is enough to explain why August 19 has become a focal point. The mystery that remains is already real. What happened during the final hours of Nolan's life, and what will the evidence ultimately show? Not because we know the answer. For people who have followed this case closely, the most important thing now is knowing what would count as a meaningful update. A meaningful update would be a documented development in the grand jury process. A meaningful update would be an official response from the Justice Department to the request for federal review, if one becomes public. Those are the developments worth watching. Anonymous social media posts are not substitutes for them, and dramatic claims about what the authorities supposedly know are not substitutes for them. The more attention a case receives, the easier it becomes for a theory to be repeated until it sounds like a fact. The audience deserves that distinction, and the people who may eventually be asked to make legal decisions based on the evidence deserve it. It is whether the next verified development brings the family closer to an answer. The public side of a case can make it look as though everything is moving quickly. A new interview appears. A lawmaker speaks. An attorney holds a press conference. A headline says investigators are reviewing something. Another headline says the autopsy is complete. That is part of what makes the August 19 date so difficult. The family is approaching a birthday while the case continues through procedures that can take time and may not produce immediate public answers. That is why their recent appearance in Atlanta matters even if it did not produce a new forensic finding. It also showed that their request has become broader. They are not only asking local officials to continue investigating, they are asking for outside review and greater transparency. The story has moved from the immediate shock of Nolan's death into a longer struggle over what can be established, who should review it, and when the public will be able to see the evidence. And August 19 arrives right in the middle of it. People know the examination has been completed. They know the report exists. They know the district attorney has said it will be presented to a grand jury before it is released publicly. That creates uncertainty. But uncertainty is not the same thing as evidence of a cover-up. That matters because the medical findings could become one of the most important pieces of the eventual explanation. If the report clarifies the cause of death, it could narrow the questions that have dominated the case. If it does not, then the uncertainty may continue in a different form. This is where the birthday angle becomes particularly powerful without being misleading. Instead, it can be presented as the date that arrives while the report remains out of public view. Will the next stage of the investigation finally clarify the medical question? Will the grand jury process produce a legal development? Will the phone analysis add anything useful? Will a federal review actually occur? The script does not have to answer them early. We know the Congressional Black Caucus has urged the DOJ to review the case. We know the state autopsy has been completed but has not been publicly released. We know the independent autopsy did not determine a definitive cause or manner of death. We know the case is expected to go before a grand jury, and we know that some of the most important questions about Nolan's final hours remain open. That is where the story stands, and that is why August 19 matters. This video has discussed publicly reported information about Nolan Wells' death and the continuing investigation. Some details remain unresolved, including the final publicly available determination of the cause and manner of death. Accounts from witnesses and the family have been presented as attributed accounts, not as established findings. No person should be treated as responsible for Nolan's death unless investigators or a court establish that through evidence and due process. Please subscribe to this channel for future updates on this case and other developing stories. This video has discussed publicly reported information about Nolan Wells' death and the continuing investigation. Some questions remain unresolved, including the final public determination of the cause and manner of death. Accounts from witnesses and the family have been presented as attributed accounts, not established findings. No person should be treated as responsible for Nolan's death unless investigators or a court establish that through evidence and due process.